The overuse of natural resources such as water, forests, minerals, and fossil fuels has led to severe environmental degradation and social injustices. While resource extraction and consumption drive the economic growth, they disproportionately harm the marginalized community, and this issue falls under the environmental justices as the burden of environmental destruction is often placed on vulnerable population with limited political power on economic means to protect themselves. So these are the example that can cause the overuse of natural resources. The number one is the industrialization and the economic growth. In here, the countries in the cooperation will exploit the resources to fuel the industrial production and often prioritizing the profit over the sustainability. The second one is deforestation and land degradation. In here, the excessive logging, mining, and the agriculture can lead to deforestation, soil erosion, as well as the biodiversity loss. The third one is the overfishing and the water scarcity. The unsustainable fishing practice deplete the population of fish, and this cause the harming of the coastal community. Then, similarly excessively groundwater extraction that leads to desertification. Other example is the fossil fuel dependence. So the heavy reliance on coal, the oil, and the natural gases can result in the habitat destructions, pollution, as well as the climate change. Consumerism and waste generation is also the cause of the overuse of natural resources because the high consumption patterns in developed nations contribute to resource depletion while affecting the poorer regions disproportionately.
Now let's talk about the environmental and social impacts of the overuse of natural resources. So first is the climate change. The overuse of fossil fuels releases greenhouse gases, causing extreme weather events that disproportionately impact low-income and indigenous communities. Next is the pollution and health hazard. Mining and industrial activities release toxins into air, water, and soil, increasing health risks for nearby populations. And moving on the displacement and land grabbing. The resource extraction often leads to the forced eviction of indigenous and rural communities, violating their rights. And another major impact is the loss of biodiversity. The ecosystem destruction threatens food security and traditional ways of life, particularly in developing nations. And lastly is the water insecurity. The overuse of water resources causes drought and conflicts, particularly in arid regions. And now let's move on the environmental justice concerns. So first is the unequal distribution of environmental harm. The poor communities, indigenous groups, and people of color often bear the burden of resource exploitation. Next is the political representation. The affected communities frequently lack the power to resist harmful extraction projects. And then next is the corporate and government exploitation. The government and multinational corporations prioritize profit over people and often ignoring the environmental regulations. Fourth is the intergenerational injustice. This is the overuse of the resources today that leaves the future generation with degraded ecosystems and fewer natural resources.
So here are the solution and the recommendations. So number one, sustainable resource management, using resources wisely for long-term balance. And number two is stronger environmental laws. So this means tougher rules and enforcement to protect nature. And number three, support for affected communities. This means helping those impacted by environmental issues. So, number four is promotion of renewable energy. So, encouraging clean energy like solar and wind. So, now we have the fifth, which is the public awareness and advocacy. This means educating and motivating people to take action. So we have here the question number one, which is how does this issue affect people, especially the vulnerable or the marginalized? The overuse of natural resources disproportionately harms vulnerable communities, including low-income peoples, indigenous peoples, and people of color. These communities often live near polluted areas, lack of access to the clean water and air, and face displacement due to deforestation, mining, and industrial projects. Additionally, climate change driven by resources overuse causes extreme weather events, food shortages, and water scarcity, making survival even harder for those already struggling. So, since marginalized group typically have less political power, they are often unavailable to or unable to challenge the corruption and governments responsible for the environmental destructions.
So now that we already know the causes of these environmental issues, let's now take a look on how it impacts our environment. So it can impact in our environment because it can lead to deforestation, water shortages, soil degradation, loss of biodiversity, and increased pollution. Fossil fuel extraction and deforestation contribute to climate change, causing rising global temperature, more frequent natural disasters, and distinctions of our ecosystems. And overfishing depletes marine population, while excessive mining and agriculture pollute the rivers and deplete soil nutrients, so making it land less productive. So as ecosystem collapse, animals and plants face extinction, disrupting the delicate balance of nature. So this is how it impacts our environment. So for the next question, what small actions can we take to address this issue? So first, we can reduce consumption by using resources wisely, and then support ethical companies that prioritize environmental responsibility, and conserve water and energy, and advocate for environment justice for awareness, and we can plant trees and protect green spaces, and lastly we can educate others. So by doing this small actions, we can contribute and make a difference in our community and in the environment.
Caring for creation reflects God's call to be a good stewards of the earth. Genesis chapter 2 verse 15. By protecting natural resources and advocating for justice, we demonstrate love for our neighbors, especially the poor and vulnerable. Proverbs chapter 31 verse 8 to 9. Small actions like reducing waste, conserving resources, and speaking out against environmental injustices help create a more just and sustainable world, reflecting God's desire for peace, justice, and flourishing for all. By protecting creation, we not only honor God's handiwork, but also create a healthier world for future generations, fulfilling our role as caretakers of His creation. But the overuse of natural resources both harms people and the environment, with marginalized communities suffering the most from pollution, displacement, and climate change. It leads to deforestation, water shortages, and biodiversity loss, making the planet less livable for future generations. However, small actions like reducing waste, conserving energy, and supporting sustainable practices can help combat these issues. As stewards of God's creation, we have a responsibility to protect the earth and advocate for justices, ensuring a fair and sustainable world for all.